All right, let's go. Ready?
Go.
Thanks for coming, everybody. Can I have your attention? Quick announcement. The Lincoln restaurant requires everybody to buy at least $5 in food, just so you know. Or $5.50 because they including tax. So that's one thing. Thank you all for coming. The agenda for tonight is we're going to talk about organizing and unionizing, forming a real union for Chicago taxi drivers. About 30 years ago, drivers lost the right to form a real union when the cab companies basically went to the leasing system. Cab drivers went from being employees to independent contractors. Now, the problems that we've had since then, there have been all sorts of attempts to organize, and for the most part, most of them have failed. There have been a few exceptions, like, for example, the Geoghegan Cab Drivers Association. There's Sean, he's the president right now. We say hi to Sean. He's the new president. So there have been some successes on smaller scales, but to have an actual union, you need to have the actual legal rights. And that's why in the last 30 years you haven't seen many successes in terms of forming a real union for Chicago taxi drivers, or taxi drivers in a lot of places. And, you know, as a driver who's been around for a long time, I started driving in '92. I've seen, many attempts, many failures. Published in the newspaper for the past 8 years, seen many attempts and many failures. And that's because we don't have a legal structure. And that's been the problem. Well, a couple of years ago, there was a renewed interest in organizing, thanks to Melissa Callahan and her efforts to organize. And there was a lot of interest in cab drivers trying to secure rights for themselves. And with that inspiration, I began reading certain books about organizing to see if there was something that could be done. And I came across a fascinating book by Tom Geoghegan, who is our keynote speaker tonight. Tom Geoghegan is a Harvard labor attorney who's written a few books and is an expert on organizing. He's represented coal miners and steel workers, and he's done fantastic work for rights of workers. And he got back to me with magic words that I had never heard before. He said, I have an idea, an actual legal strategy to form a real union. And I'm going to turn it over to Tom and let him talk about what that strategy is right now. So let's give it up for Tom.
Hi, everyone. I can tell you that when George and I came to the office, he came to interview me for some article, and I was not especially interested in being interviewed. I'm much more interested in helping you guys. And I don't want to make a big deal about this. I'll just lay out the two theories that I had, which could help leverage the struggle that you're in to get representation with the city and kind of equal bargaining power. What strikes one looking at cab drivers and their relationship with the city is the way that the city excessively regulates the employment conditions of cab drivers in a way that is different from every other occupational group. You know, physicians are regulated at the state level, but they have input in how they're regulated. Nurses, the same. Even plumbers, electricians. The regulation is light compared to the kind of detailed supervision over your day-to-day operations with cab drivers. So there's a kind of discrimination that is going on here. I think that this can be attacked in two ways. The first way is to challenge the constitutionality of the very detailed regulation that the city is doing of cab drivers, and say that while the city has a police power, and that's a term in constitutional law that you learn in law school, to regulate health and safety and the public interest, these regulations go beyond that power. That they're acting outside of the constitutional power that they have by really getting involved in almost an employer-employee type relationship with the cab drivers. and that there is a sphere in which the city has a role to play in regulation of cab drivers, but they've gone beyond that. And that this action outside of this delegated police power that they have, to ensure the safety of the public streets, to ensure the safety of the citizenry, has been abused, and that a whole set of regulations that we would focus on are beyond the constitutional authority of the city. And I don't know of any challenge to this that any cab drivers have ever made. In other words, to push back the city in some way and say that these detailed regulations are only permissible on a contractual basis. And that contractual basis would have to be through some representative of the cab drivers. Now, the city, there's no law that regulates how employers, or certainly a city employer, would have to follow in terms of recognition of a cab drivers union. So in labor law, in the private sector, 30% showing gets you a union, but an employer can recognize a bargaining agent without a 30% showing. What we want to do is to bring a legal strategy that pushes the city in a position where it's looking around for a bargaining representative. Because we know it's very hard to organize cab drivers. So if there are groups that the city could in good faith say represent cab drivers, then the city could get out of this trap that we hope to put them in the lawsuit, where they don't have enough police power to do the kind of regulation they like, and say you can do that if you bargain with a representative entity of the cab drivers. That's strategy number one. Strategy number two is really to allege that the city has picked on this one occupational group and excessively regulated it in a way that is unique, that there's no analog to with any other employee group or any other profession in the city, and that at least one major difference between the way the city regulates cab drivers and every other group is the, let me back up and put it this way, that one of the differences or that the fact that the city regulates cab drivers in a way that it regulates no other occupational group has a discriminatory impact on persons of color protected by the Illinois Civil Rights Act of 2005. In the federal system, you have to show intentional discrimination, but in state law, under the Illinois Civil Rights Act of 2005, all you have to show is that the city has a policy of picking on cab drivers in a disparate and unusual way compared to other occupational groups that has in effect a discriminatory impact. That under this policy of excessive detailed regulation of cab drivers versus light regulation of all other employee and occupational groups, there is a disproportionate impact on persons of color. This is not a neutral policy in that sense. So therefore, the whole excessively detailed regulation of this of cab drivers and could be challenged on that basis. Even better, if we could get a decent showing, union cards, people asking to have the city represent them, and having the city refuse, that act could be challenged under the Illinois Civil Rights Act as racially discriminatory, given the high proportion of persons of color and actually non-citizens among cab drivers. There are ways to challenge that legally and to put the city in a bind that way. Now that strategy, that third strategy, really requires an organizing drive to precede it, so that really a substantial showing of cards or representation would have to precede any kind of action like that. But if you had 3,000 signatures or 4,000 signatures and presented that, and the city refused to bargain, at least you'd have a conditioned precedent for bringing a suit where you'd say that refusal to bargain has a discriminatory impact. They're singling out and stigmatizing these workers for racial or other reasons, or ethnic reasons. And that would be a basis of dragging the city into court. The fact is, it's not just a strategy. It really does have something to do with cab drivers are weak for various reasons. They're independent contractors. They don't work through employers. They haven't unionized. But I think one reason that cab drivers are weak is that disproportionately persons of color who are stigmatized, many of them not citizens of the United States, that's made it easier for the city to push them around. So there's a real bona fides, good faith basis to a discrimination claim. So let me just go back and review the 3 claims. I mean, there are 2 that you could probably bring now. A third would require some organizing. The first is to challenge the city's authority to regulate cab drivers in the detailed way they do now under the city's police power, that they're acting outside the scope. The second is to say that that same conduct also violates the Illinois Civil Rights Act of 2005 because it has a discriminatory impact. The third is to demand that the city bargain with a representative, make a showing that this representative has support among the cab drivers, and if the city refuses to bargain, bring a lawsuit and challenge that as discriminatory as well. You know, all of these things kind of overlap. The point is that the lawsuit in itself isn't going to solve all your problems, but it could give you some leverage in dealing with the city that would be different from and maybe more viable than a strike or other actions that cab drivers used to engage in the days of waiting with Lefty, but probably will not do now. So that's what I had in mind. That's what I proposed to George. It does really require a kind of unified effort among cab drivers to get cards. That would be hugely helpful. And to put the city in a position where it has to say yes or no to bargaining. Right now, we couldn't bring a suit that the city's refusing to bargain because nobody's asking it to bargain. You've got to put the city in a position where a demand has been made that is credible, and then if refused, then you can go to court. And I think it's worth a shot if people want to put in the time and really are serious about trying to push back the city's ever-increasing intrusion into the working lives of cab drivers and detailed and sometimes Mickey Mouse regulation. I think it can be challenged. I think it can be challenged legally. I think it could be challenged even without an organizing drive. But if you went out and got the signatures and made a demand for representation, that would be helpful too. If a legal action were successful on the first 2 grounds, on the grounds that this is beyond the police power of the city to regulate in this detailed way, and some of these regulations can be challenged on that basis, you at least create a predicate where you can then go to the city and say, while you don't have the regulatory power to do this, it could be done contractually. And you could enter a contract with a representative of the cab drivers union. You know, in Europe, much of the wage bargaining and much of the detailed collective bargaining is done by unions that don't represent a majority of the workers. Or at least it's never put to that test. And there's nothing that prohibits that here, it's just that usually employers demand it. What is also important about that, however, is, and the flip side of that, is that you don't have automatic dues collection in European countries. So, for example, in Germany, you know, you have AG Metal, the big union there representing, bargaining for, say, 80% of the auto industry, let's say, or 99% of the auto industry. But the employees, but there's no checkoff. The employees don't automatically pay dues into AG Metal. AG Metal gets its dues from voluntary contributions. So when you hear that the union membership in Germany is 25% of the workforce, that's 25% of the people voluntarily giving. There's no compulsion. It could be zero. The reason it's not zero is that the employees realize how important it is to have a union representing them. And I would say that if you could create an entity that was a credible alternative, you wouldn't get everybody, you wouldn't get all 12,000 kicking in dues, but you'd get 25%. Now, what about the other 75%? Aren't they freeloaders? Yes, they're freeloaders. They're free riders. Isn't that a bad thing? Well, go over to Europe. You know, they have wage increases, they have worker rights, they have works councils, and it's a system that is just full of people who are just free riders. But the people who are contributing and who are behind it and who do get involved have created a system where at least they're protected. And I would say the same here. I think it's going to be hard to get a system in place where you are just checking off dues from people. But I do think that you could get a system in place where you get enough people recognizing how important this is that they would make voluntary contributions. There was a question and answer thing about, you know, me and my relationship with the cab drivers. I'm not in an attorney-client relationship with anybody at the moment. George is a very good friend, and I'd like to help him. He's helped me, and I'd like to help him. But in terms of my fee and all of that, I'm not expecting anybody to come up with any money to pay me for anything. That'd be nice, and I'd be grateful for it, and it would help the cause quite a bit. But if I did this case, I'd probably try to do it on a basis where if we prevailed, we got some sort of legal fee award from the city. I have to tell you, if you really want to get into a legal campaign, it's nice to give the lawyer some money because these are long battles, and we rarely get back everything if we prevail. But you know, most of the cases that I've done have been cases where, you know, workers have put up $10,000 or $15,000 to pay for the costs, or $20,000 even in litigation, like the Baker case that we just finished against Outboard Marine Corporation. But you know, at the end of it, I mean, we incurred hundreds of thousands of dollars in quote legal fees that, you know, our clients didn't pay for, and we were, in the case of OMC, very fortunate to get some of that back at the end but that was from the defendant, not from the plaintiffs. So in this case, I guess we'd be thinking about something similar to that. But this isn't that far along that we should even have that kind of discussion. I think the first thing to do is to find out if people are interested in really putting together a real viable bargaining representative that would have credibility with the city as a representative of the cab drivers. From where I sit at the moment, I'm skeptical that you all can do that. If you can, then we've got a lawsuit. If you can't, then I question whether it's worth following. I mean, I could bring a case now challenging some of the regulations that the city is doing is beyond its power, but where's this going? It's not going anywhere unless there's some entity that gets created, or a coalition of entities, whether the Ghanaian cab drivers and this group and that group that form some sort of coalition, that can go to the city and say, look, we've got a united front, we're bargaining, we want to talk to you, we want you to deal with us, we want these excessive regulations to be done with our consent on a contractual basis. That's what's got to happen. You know, the lawsuit's just a part of that. It isn't the whole Megillah. The whole Megillah is to put together the organization. So that's what I had in mind, bringing a suit, challenging the city's police power authority to regulate in the excessive detailed way it's doing right now, and say, and second, point out how discriminatory it is, racially and otherwise. I don't think that you necessarily just even have to bring a racial claim, just equal protection claim, which is more viable on a non-racial basis under state law than it is under federal law. But a civil rights claim too. And third, if you can put together a organization that can present a series of cards and say, look, you're effectively the employer, bargained with us about these excessive regulations, the refusal itself could then be actionable under the civil rights law. But you've got to put together an organization. And that's what I can't do for you. So that's what I had in mind. That's what I've talked to George about. That's what he asked me to come and explain to you. If you guys want to put something together, we'd be happy to represent you. Or you can go to another law firm, you know? So I'd be glad to give them the ideas, what ideas we have. Any questions?
Yes. Yeah, I want to get some questions from the cards first. So
Oh,
we'll get to
okay.
those. Would owning or leasing make a difference? Some people own, some people lease their cabs. Would that make a difference in all of this in terms of being represented?
No. I mean, it wouldn't make any difference from the way we frame the complaint and allege it. It's obviously going to create a potential counter-arguments from the city saying, well, you know, some of these people are owners, some of them are employees, it's not. But I think our argument would be that whether you're an owner or an employee, the city is really regulating the conditions of your employment, and that it doesn't matter, that would be our argument, whether you're an owner or an employee.
Okay.
The city might argue otherwise, but that's what lawsuits are about.
All right, here's another one. Hang on. Is a class action suit, I got three questions total here. Is a class action suit possible based on the argument that we have to operate the vehicles too much, 100 hours plus a week, to get two minimum of a wage, $8 an hour, it says here.
That's minimum wage. Illinois minimum
Oh,
wage is $8 an hour. Federal is $7.75 or $7.25.
Yeah.
What is federal now?
You know, that's, federal is lower.
Yeah, then federal state is 8 and federal is I think $7.75, and we have to operate the vehicle more than what would be allowed for like a truck driver or any other vehicle operator to get to minimum wage. We're being put in a position to operate the vehicle at a dangerous level to get to minimum wage.
It's a good claim. I'd throw it in.
Thank you.
Okay.
But it might get mooted by the fairing.
All
There
right.
is one.
And then here's a question from Mahmoud Al-Ghazali. What can I do to get more drivers to join the campaign, and how many people do we need to win our goal?
Well, I would say enough to be credible enough that if the city refuses to deal with you, you could go to court and complain about it. Now, the standard in federal law for getting an election is basically 30%. Be nice to have 30% of the cab drivers, but it's pretty hard to say exactly how many cab drivers there are or what constitutes 30%. So I wouldn't, at least at the moment, initially, without thinking about this harder, I would not say that there's any one magic number. But I think you've got to be in the thousands before you've got any kind of credibility with the city.
All right.
And credibility to go to court and say, you know, this is enough. I'd hate to box us in and say there's some magic minimum that we have to meet.
Other questions?
What would the ultimate goal of this legal challenge be? To actually revert us back to being employees of some entity or another?
No, it would be to offer the city, push back the city's ability to regulate and curb it, and then say, if you want to go beyond this narrow sphere that we're pushing you back into, you've got to deal with in a good faith, with a representative of the employees, and enter this on a contractual basis and not on a regulatory basis. Do you see what I mean? So you've got to step outside the role of being the cop and start being, what they can't do as a cop, they can do on a contractual basis, if that makes any sense to you. And so therefore, we'll allow a certain amount of detailed regulation. We'll consent to it contractually, but you can't impose it on us unilaterally. So that you get into, you might end up negotiating about whether to take credit cards and this and that, and say, we will take credit cards in return for you backing off on this and the other thing. You'll do what people do in negotiations. There are lots of chits on the table, right? So they want something really bad that you don't especially want to give up, but you want something even more, and you'll say, I'll give you X, but I want Y. And there are, in the case of cab drivers, probably 45 things lined up on a table like that. So you're in a position where the city has a safe harbor for doing what it's doing if it gets your consent. That's the idea of the lawsuit. At least that's my idea in trying to put this together.
Mike?
So, getting beyond police powers, when you do enter that contractual type of negotiation, if you do come to some type of loggerhead with the city, who is the arbitrator, or even beyond an arbitrator, who would supervise a conflict that the city and the lawyers representing cab drivers?
No one.
No, we need that.
Unless you agree to it. I mean, you could agree to have some sort of arbitration.
So if it was beyond police powers, we could refuse it ultimately.
Yeah, because you're not, that would be my view.
Wouldn't Councilor Geoghegan, all of this come within the purview of the regulatory process and oversight and culture of the National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB? I have this notion as a layperson. Is this true?
Because it's a public employer, you're not in interstate commerce, or you aren't subject to the jurisdiction of the National Labor Relations Board. And the better question is whether you're subject to the jurisdiction of the Illinois Local Labor Relations Board.
How about that one?
Well, I don't think that they would take jurisdiction. They wouldn't recognize you as an employee. But I don't think it's such a bad idea if you had enough cards to, ask them to hold an election. But I think they would probably say that you're just not in a normal employer-employee relationship. And what we want to bring the suit is to say that you're kind of in this netherworld. You're not one and you're not the other, but it's unfair and it's discriminatory, and they're acting beyond their authority.
And the Illinois State Labor Board wouldn't sort of referee this whole process for us? And put in independent arbitrators that we mutually agree to resolve disputes between us?
They can't do that.
Like the feds can do that. But
I don't think that's the venue you want to be in. I think they just, it's a very timid bureaucracy, and they don't like to make a lot of waves. I wouldn't. I think you're better off staying out of it. I've never had any luck in Illinois. And in fact, it's shocking to me how many things they don't take jurisdiction of. So, for example, we have been representing police officers
What? Did you have any? No.
who ran in the local city fraternal order of police election, and they were tossed out of the union simply because they ran. They got 42% of the vote. And after the election was over, the winners just tossed them out. Now, that's completely illegal under federal labor law, but it's not applied. So we went to the Illinois Local Labor Relations Board and said, well, we don't take jurisdiction of that. So, I mean,
Other questions? Bernie?
You talked in general terms about this overarching regulation by the city, and we're pretty much on the same page. But I'm going to play devil's advocate now. And you've already mentioned forcing credit cards down our throats. I'm not particularly happy with this. Can you name some other specifics that you would go after that would be under the jurisdiction of administrative regulation as opposed to ordinance? And in terms of ordinance, I'd like to see the restriction lifted on parking on residential side streets. It's really stupid on the part of the city, not letting us do it, but it takes collective bargaining to make them change something. Could you address these issues?
no, why don't you address them? I mean, I don't know your individual grievances as well as you do. So you should tell me what your grievances are. I shouldn't be telling you. You're the client. So if you have grievances about the detail of the regulations, the way George has described them to me, then those are the ones that we should be putting forward. But I don't want to pick and choose. I think that you guys have to say what you're upset about, what you want to see changed.
Well, let me follow up then. Would you be able to pick apart, differentiate between overzealous enforcement of regulations and laws as opposed to having these overarching regulations and laws in the first place?
Would I be able to distinguish between overzealous enforcement?
Would you be able to perhaps persuade a court that, hey, they're writing those parking tickets when they're not writing the rest of the people parking tickets?
Yeah, well, that falls into the discrimination category.
Okay.
Other questions?
So let's say we have an
That's not so
organization.
much a police power question, although it could be.
Let's say, I
That's
mean,
a hassle, though.
he brings up a good point, because the United Taxi Drivers Community Council has actually been addressing some of these issues. We've gotten some pledges from aldermen to actually introduce legislation at the city council to remove parking restrictions in their wards and possibly citywide. That's just some of the issues we've been working on, and also the violence against cab drivers issues. But let's say we had an organization in place in Chicago that had thousands of drivers, cab drivers that signed up, their members, they'll sign pledge cards, whatever is needed, under one umbrella, such as the United Taxi Drivers Community Council. And we come to you and say, okay, we've got 5,000 members, let's push this thing forward to file suit or something. Do you have any projected timeline for when such a thing could actually be heard in court and actually get? Do you have any? Do you have anything like that, like a timeline, projected estimate? And we know that the city would of course argue against this. And we heard here several weeks ago about some lawyers that were filing a class action lawsuit to overturn the flight tickets, and they've been at it 9 years.
Overturn what tickets?
Flying tickets. There's a particular kind of ticket where they don't hand it to you, they just write your number down and you get a ticket in the mail 6 or 8 or 10 months later. But these guys have been working on this class action lawsuit for 9 years, so I'm just curious if you have some ideas. Like, let's say we have an organization, we come to you with the pledge cards, and we say, go for it.
Well, don't come to me with the pledge cards. You
Well,
better
no.
go to the city.
We'll come to you with an organization that says,
Yeah.
yes, we want, like we're in place now to file this lawsuit that you're imagining is a good strategy to push back the city. Do you have, from that moment, do you have any kind of timeline?
And we have some dues for some legal expenses.
I can tell you that depending on the workload in the office, we can file a complaint in 30 to 45 days. What happens after that, litigation is sometimes it goes very fast, sometimes it takes forever. No, I don't have a timeline, except that we push it as hard as we can, and we think very seriously about trying to do it in the context of a preliminary injunction. I think that if a suit were filed, there'd be a motion to dismiss filed within,
2 minutes?
no, 45 days.
Right.
And there'd be a briefing that would probably go on for 90 days in a hearing, and there'd be an up or down decision as to whether or not the case could go forward. If the case can go forward, you've got a huge stick in your hand. And if the case is dismissed, you have to appeal it.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Yeah, I have one more. Dean has one. Let him go first.
Steve?
Yes, if we file issues then in the court, the union, and then even if we don't know that the timelines, but actually we don't know. However, what do you think about the how much percentage to winning chance to be the union in the court?
What are the chances of winning?
Yes. Because now is everybody thinking about the whole in this room. Okay, we can have the unions from now on, but still we cannot have actually the unions that here. So for the near future, it takes time. This 10 years or 5 years, and then a half year. But we have to focus on something. If we have something percentage of the winning chance, then we smallest the things that we do have to do, because we are humans. We have to do something. You know what I mean? But still we still doubt, because every time we try to something do, but unfortunately we lost until now. So we are taxi drivers in the individual is not so much power we have now. But from now on, okay, let's do together. Then that from moment, we want to still know that your feelings, how much percentage we can win.
You're saying if there's a high if we've got a good chance of winning, if there's a high percentage of chance of winning, then it's something that everybody will want to do. Versus if there's no chance of winning, then why should we do it? Is that what you're saying?
The meaning is what reasonable chance we have in the future. Without the reasonable, so what we have to do is spend our whole time to do things. But we hope we win. You know? So we just wanted to start into some things to be good, but the reasonable chance for everybody to understand that it's a reasonable chance. Okay, we do. Then we starting together, all together. You know what I mean? This is we have to figure out what we have the chance to winning.
Well, can I answer?
Yes.
Oh. This is what you'd call a kind of public interest case. And you're inventing a whole new area of law. So there's no precedent for this suit in a normal sense. So that argues against it. Makes it much harder. And if it is just, say, I'm representing you, and we go in and I don't know your name, but
My name is Steve Kim.
yeah, nice to meet you. Suppose I'm representing you, Mr. Kim, is that what you said? Yeah. You are my client, I'm going to bring this suit. I would say our chances are 1 in 100 of winning. But if I'm representing not just you, but 3,000 other cab drivers who've signed up, and there's a publicity machine, and it's in the newspaper, and there's big stories about it, and so on. The judge thinks, hey, the cab drivers are really behind this. The chances of our winning go up. So I have a claim, I think I can come up with a claim, that gets you in the door of a courthouse and has some plausibility, is not regarded as frivolous by a court. But it would be dismissed if there's nobody behind it. So, for example, we have brought this case to get a special election to fill Barack Obama's seat, and we tried to get the League of Women Voters to be the plaintiff. I didn't have time to find anybody else, and I did this in the middle of the campaign. And they didn't do it for various reasons. If they had done it, our chances of winning would have gone way up because we have a very good claim in fact. We're going to bring another suit very soon where I think our chances of winning are going to be very high because we do have a League of Women Voters as a plaintiff. So that gives it a lot of credibility. How judges react to cases like this depends on who they think is behind it and how serious it is. So the more groups that are behind it, the stronger the case. The fewer groups and the fewer people behind it, the weaker the case. So how well I can do as your lawyer depends on how well you do in terms of organizing. The more time you put into this, I think in the end, the more reward you get. If you put very little time in it, it's not worth doing. If you put a lot of time into it, even if you lose the case, you have created a kind of framework where the city is used to at least dealing with you on the other side through attorneys. And that in itself is a huge gain. So you could lose the case. In fact, you might well lose this case and still achieve some substantial result because the city says, well, we beat them, but we've got to deal with them.
Papas?
I'd like to know the city, they give us hard time when we go inspection. Last year I paid for brakes $840. I passed inspection in December and February. They put me for schedule for a new inspection. I passed the inspection. The first time I passed on December. And then on the second inspection, they find me the brakes is wrong. So they give me a ticket, of course.
What's the question?
And I went for a hearing, but I asked for a continue because my lawyer was not there and I sent somebody else. So then he argued for something. They don't give another continue. They make me to go to court by myself and they find me guilty for $840 for the brakes. For a month and a half, the brakes that was passed inspection, the same brakes. Why? Just a moment, I'm not finished yet.
They're testing the machines over there.
But 2 weeks ago, I went for inspection, okay? Everything that was fine with the car, but they say you have to paint on the side of the doors. And no tapes allowed anymore. So I went back, and I come in for second inspection, all right? Say, you paint the car? I say, they told me I don't need paint, the company. So they tell me to go to the office. I complained to the office.
What's
and
your question? This is the question period.
Just a moment. I complained, to the guy, the manager up there. He came outside and he find the captain was perfect. I'd like to know why the city, they give us hard time. And another thing I have to explain to you, my mirror that was slow, right? They didn't tell me anything. They let me drive with the mirror slow. I'd like to know why the inspection. And another thing, they tell me, your wheels is bent. For crying out loud, last year there was potholes all over the place. Why they don't give me new wheels? My mirror, they was slow, okay? They didn't tell me anything, the mirror is slow. They let me drive. There are some people up there where they discriminate the cab drivers. I'd like to know why. The city of Chicago play games. They like the money from cab drivers.
I think that this is what he's talking about in general. These are specific issues that you have, if I may. These are specific issues that you have that a lot of us have, but he's talking about the overall legal challenge to it. You're giving good examples of what he's talking about. I don't know if you want to add something to that. I mean,
Why do they do it? They do it because you don't do anything about it.
They do it what?
They do it because you don't do anything about it.
I see.
That's when you can't fight by yourself. That's why we try to organize it.
Exactly. Mike?
You know, you might put in a grievance procedure and have,
Everybody
There
has
is
that.
none.
Everybody has.
If you were successful in, ultimately, if the city refuses a collective bargaining or refuses to recognize a group of cab drivers, and you're successful in getting the court to say that you should recognize a group of cab drivers, wouldn't by definition this union have to be democratically elected by its membership? And if you fail, do we really risk anything at all by failing, or?
no.
And specifically, a lot of people are concerned about control of the union. Wouldn't it have to be by definition be democratic?
Well, I should think so.
Other questions?
It's not going to have much credibility otherwise. I mean,
Mahmoud?
but you know, it's not, unions aren't regulated by the state of Illinois, public sector unions. So.
Can I give an example with the city issue, like related to this problem? We have a problem with the standard parking at the airport. And I went to the city, I went to the commissioner, I went to everybody. Tried to solve the problem. Now, after 20 years, I'm not allowed, I divorced her, so I can't go to her. 20 years driving a car.
Yeah.
Every single night at the airport, I've been almost a month and a half, they decide not to let me go to the airport, or here or mid, just drop off and don't stay a lot there. So I gotta leave in. A couple of nights ago, was driving through. The traffic was on the highway like hour and a half to get back to downtown. I have to leave in. And people waiting on the line for cars. Just because one of these standard parking, they don't like me. We had an argument one day, and I was right, they were wrong. The city stand up with them. I did my part, and they kicked me out of the airport after 2 or 3 hours waiting. They called the police, they said you have to leave.
Who kicked you out?
The police, through the standard park. They said, we don't need him. I went to the commissioner, they said, how these people they run the show. You know, the lady, like, she had, you know, like, under hand of Commissioner Rice, whatever her name, Charlie, whatever. She said, okay, it was a weekend, just stay away from the airport for this couple of days. You don't need this argument. So I said, okay. Now, I worked for a flash cab company for the last approximately 18, 19 years. They sent a letter to Flash. They tried to suspend me from the company. Now they called me in. They said, okay, in order for you to stay in a Flash, don't go to the airport. So I don't know who got to fight who. The company abusing all the cab drivers anyway. I don't want to, all the companies, in too many different ways. There's too many examples here. They take our money in too many ways. I release any problem, any complaint, anybody pick up the phone in the street, call the company where I'm from. So we have like million of problems here. I could like write a book on this. But now, what I'm facing now, 2 months now, or a month and a half almost, I don't go to the airport. If I go there, they call the police. They kick me out.
Same answer, right?
I mean, I could hire you as a lawyer. I could pay for it.
Let me say
I don't
this.
care.
This is a question. This is the question session. As far as telling personal examples, we'll come to that later. But right now, let's use this time for questions. So if you have a question, make it please make it brief. Sean, do you have a question?
Yeah.
We'll go around this way and get everybody.
Okay. My question is, if we organize the union, we're gonna have leaders, and how are we gonna pay these leaders?
How are we going to pay the leaders?
Yeah.
Well, you could adopt a constitution and bylaws and require people who want to be members of the union to pay dues. I said before, it's only in America where people think, well, we've got to tax somebody. Every other country in the world, it's voluntary. So if people want to be part of a union, they'll contribute money. If people don't want to contribute money, there will be no union.
Okay. I'm not done yet, because the reason I asked was that I'm from the Ghanaian Cab Drivers Association.
Yes.
I took over from John Henry. So I have a group of people that I can talk to, and if they are willing, they got their money right. But are the other organizations, because there's like the Koreans, there is, various ethnic groups. How are they going to organize to be part of this thing we're driving at?
That's up to you. You know, I can tell you the legal structure for it, but if you guys don't want to do it, it's not going to happen. I mean, you would create a organization that would be the representative. It would have bylaws. It would have rights of membership. It would be democratically run. You could put in the bylaws that the dues will be such and such, but they can be changed by democratic vote. You know, it's easy enough. I mean, what I can contribute to this as a lawyer is very simple. The hard part is for you to go around and get people who will say, yes, let's do it.
Yeah. Here.
Yeah, I had a concern about the term employment on the authorization cards that people are signing up to be part of the union. And I was wondering, how does that, in collective bargaining, where does that place us legally? If we had an entity, an organization in relation to the city as employees. The concern here is, would we end up having to play even more hardball with the city, perpetually fighting the city? Don't get me wrong, I believe in the union, but are they going to want to regulate our hours or track us on GPS? And is that going to open a door for the city to attempt to have even more control over us?
Well, they may be responsible for paying you too. You know, it opens a door for you both to enter consensual arrangements where that might happen. But you'd have to consent to them, at least in my view.
George, other questions?
Yes, I have one.
Hold on, I was coming this way. I think we had, you had a question. Okay. I want to get to people who haven't asked questions, but go ahead, Bernie.
Okay, did I hear you correctly in saying that initially you don't want any money up front from us?
I said I'd like it. I think that, you know, in class actions of this kind, I think it'd be good to put together a fund of $15,000 or $20,000. If there was, I mean, my interest in doing this will depend on how organized you guys are. That's more important than the upfront money.
George, you have my name on one of the cards. I'm pledging $50 right now, and you have all these people's businesses. And I will pay that to you.
Okay.
So mine will be the first thing.
Yeah, I'd like to ask you to pay any costs, but there may be very few costs in this case.
Costs are generally a lot less than the fees, are they not?
Oh, yeah, well, there's the filing fee. I'd like somebody to pay the filing fee.
$100. Jump change.
Okay. More questions going this way. Melissa.
Thank you for coming tonight, first of all. I am aware that there have been conversations between fleet owners regarding your unionizing strategy and that they would like to use it and exclude lease drivers. Are you aware of these conversations, first of all? And then, if so, have you been a part of these conversations? And whether or not you have or haven't, if organizing does not happen amongst drivers, would you consider using your strategy for fleet owners?
First, I don't think that we're ever going to end up in an employer-employee relationship. And I don't think the city wants that, and it's very unlikely to happen. But that doesn't mean that you can't bargain in a way that is analogous to employer-employee relations. That's answering the last question first. As to my knowledge of conversations between anybody, it's nil. You know, I have not been party to any conversations at all. I have talked to George about this a couple of times, about the legal strategy, and what I've said to him is exactly what you just heard. So he hasn't heard anything different. You know everything that I've had to say about this, and all I know as to the organizing driver, the conversations, is just what I've picked up in maybe, we've had one other meeting, I think, that was some months back where we talked to a few people. I don't know anything about who's doing what.
Thank you.
So would you say that your best case strategy, best case scenario would be an organization emerges out of Chicago that is membership based, that has a constitution, bylaws, articles of incorporation, registered with the state and federal government, a democratic process for election and decision making, and that would then gather up enough cab drivers within it in order to achieve a bargaining position with the city?
Yes.
Because we have such an organization already on the ground here in Chicago. The United Taxi Drivers Community Council, been around for 2 years, we're building a membership. That's exactly what you're talking about, a voluntary association, just like they have in Europe, just like they have in New York City, and at least a dozen other cities around this country. So, you know, the chances are good if people get behind this organizing strategy that within a year or two we could be in a place to do this.
Except your organization is not controlled by cab drivers, so that's the only big
Oh,
problem.
it is controlled by cab drivers.
That's a deal breaker.
It is controlled by cab
No, it's
drivers.
not.
Let me put it this, let me lay it out this way. This, it isn't, I'm not trying to pick sides here one way or another. I'm not trying to go with your group against that group. I can tell you as a lawyer that this isn't going to work unless everybody gets together. Okay? So if there is, if you're bringing a suit and somebody is saying, oh no, we're the organization, no, we're the organization, no, then it's not worth bringing.
We almost should probably start a fresh, new, true umbrella group that everyone gets behind, even if they keep their separate identities as part of the coalition.
Well, I can't advise on that, but I can say this, that they're really, I mean, if this thing is factionalized at the beginning, there's not a lot of hope.
I agree, Gregory, and that's what this is. That's what we're all here together. That's the Chicago Taxi Drivers Union. Controlled by cab drivers. You guys saw the sheet. It's the Chicago Taxi Drivers Union. That's your group. You have an equal vote as I do.
Yeah, I think a fresh umbrella group is the way to start, where
That's what this is.
Get together.
I agree.
UTC and you, and we need a fresh new
The
name.
drivers of the UTCC are more than welcome to be a part of this.
And you can't pick the name. We all have to pick the name.
Absolutely.
Councilor Geoghegan, because everything's interrelated, and I take the long-term approach. There's no rush. I mean, we've got decades to work on this. I have nothing else to do if it takes 20, 25, 30 years.
Yeah, but I'm 60 years old. So.
And are you going to run for Congress again? And do you think if you get elected, you can get some national legislation passed to change the legal context and the judicial context in which we're operating in the United States of America?
Well,
because I voted for you.
Thank you.
And I'd like to vote for you again.
Oh, thank you.
Are you going to run again? Maybe. Well, how did you do?
It was Senate seat coming up.
No, I didn't know this plan. No. But it was fun. We caused some trouble.
All right. But
Other questions?
if you got elected, couldn't you maybe get some national legislation introduced and passed in Congress?
Well, if I had been elected, my focus would have been trying to increase labor rights.
There you go.
That's good. Thank you.
But I didn't get elected.
Right here.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment in response to your question about starting a new organization. UTCC just got 501c3 status. It took almost a year and a half to do. And getting 501c3 status is an important way of an organization being able to function as an association. So, for me, I've been working as a volunteer pro bono attorney for about a year for UTCC. And I work for cab drivers, not for anybody but cab drivers. And so in my mind, I know Tom, I respect Tom, I think it's a great idea. I've put in all this time because I really believe that the cab drivers are being badly used by the city. I think Tom and I share that interest in wanting to see something happen for this group. But the idea of starting fresh, I think even you commented that there have been a lot of starts. I don't know if other organizations have done what this group did and actually go out and find lawyers and create a 501c3.
Right here, Chicago Taxi Drivers Union. 501c4, I think, is the labor union, right? Yeah, that's what we did.
There's not 501c4 and a 501c3 is not. think.
Correct.
In fact, it took, we went back in order to make sure that it could be a 501c3. But my only comment is, you know, I appreciate what you're saying about Fresh Start. I appreciate what you're saying about, you know, unity, and I totally agree with you about that. But the idea of, like, how many times can this group afford to restart? I don't know.
Well, I hear you, I hear you. If there's factionalism, it kind of
I agree with you.
toxifies the whole bargaining cultural,
Sure.
bargaining corporate culture.
I think there's agreement that it's got to be, you know, agreement amongst the taxi drivers about going forward. That's what's right.
It's got to be built on a solid foundation. That's the bottom line.
Can you just define what a democratic organization is? Because before I went to the restroom, I heard people claiming that the UTCC is a democratic organization. Ultimately, there have to be an election. People have so much fear of this factionalism that one particular small clique of people is somehow going to represent all of us without our consent. Could you just please make it clear to everybody that a union would be controlled by the membership through an election? Is that not the definition of a democratic organization?
Well, that's, I've spent a lot of my life as a labor lawyer suing unions for not having democratic elections. So I'm really committed to that. And tomorrow I'm supposed to talk to a class at Loyola about a law school class about union corruption, basically about unions that don't operate democratically. So I wouldn't be involved in this if I thought the union weren't going to be operated democratically. It's just not, I'm not interested, especially since I'm doing it on a contingent basis. So.
Earlier in the meeting, you were saying that cab drivers were being discriminated because they're like foreigners. And you mentioned that, you know, the only way it's going to work is if the drivers, everybody, organizes and sticks together. A lot of these foreign cab drivers are afraid to say anything because a lot of them are not legal here.
Oh, sure.
They, you know, and what do we try to do to get these drivers that are not legal to stand up for their rights? You know, not be afraid to say anything.
I don't know.
Does anybody here do know?
Well, you don't need a majority of cab drivers to get representation. That's why you have an organized and sufficient critical mass to legitimate representation of maybe only 30% who are legal.
You can represent them vicariously.
Strength. We need them.
We only need 30% maybe, Councilor Geoghegan is telling us.
30% is a critical mass.
And 30% of us are here legally and not afraid.
Any other questions?
Yeah, how can you tell whether somebody's legal or not?
You can't, but...
So, I wouldn't even raise that issue.
You just did.
I mean, I was born here, my dad was a foreigner, you know, so. I mean, we're a nation of mutts, to put it bluntly.
Got a mutt for president. Said so himself. I'm just quoting the man.
All right. Tom, thanks so much for coming here. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.